Okay, thanks. Hello, everyone. This is ACDC 155. The agenda is here in the chat. It's issue 1434 on the PM repo. So today we have a few things to touch on for Pectra, a number of things for Fusaka, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So with Pectra, I'm not sure if there's any testnet updates worth covering. As we all know, mainnet is coming up May 7th. And yeah, we had said previously we would aim for client releases for Pectra mainnet next week, the 21st of April. Blog post a few days after that. Is everyone feeling good about this? Any issues client teams want to bring up with releases, or do we all feel like we can make that in time? Okay, I'll assume everyone's ready because no one's chiming in. Otherwise, oh yeah, Mario.
Yeah, maybe if that was a question for CL devs only, but I can give an update for testing and what we were doing on the EL side. Basically, we've been writing a lot of new tests and just reviewing tests. But everything looks good so far. What we've been doing is that everything that we write or think about, we just run it against all clients. And if we find something, we report it. But so far, it's looking good. And we are more confident than previous weeks about the coverage. So yeah, just wanted to chime in to say that.
Cool, thanks. One quick reminder. So we had tried to put in to place a little organization for the mainnet fork, just in the event we needed any sort of instant response. So there's this document here that I linked again on the PM repo. And essentially, it's just having point people from each client team, just so in the event we need to get in touch with someone, we know who that is. It would be great if you could add some context in the next few days on this document just as a PR. And yeah, so take a look at that. Otherwise, any other Pectra stuff that we want to get into at the moment? I think people generally feel good about it and are making progress with releases. So, okay. If there are no other Pectra things, then let's turn to Fusaka. So with Fusaka, to kick us off, we have PureDOS with DevNet 6. DevNet 6 is live. Maybe Perry or someone would like to give an update just on how that's going.
Yeah, previous DevNet 6 have launched approximately a week ago, and we seem to be having some problems now, just like started a few epochs ago. It's basically a few clients are having some issues, especially Nimbus seems to have issues, but they said that the EA side also seems to be struggling. So I haven't had too much time this week to dive deep into it, but maybe some of the client teams can give an update.
Anyone have anything to share?
I know that for example, for REST, there was some block processing time issues. This is for PLS, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Was this related to the solve-proof computation?
Not really. It just for unknown reasons, the block processing time jumped sometimes even up to 40 seconds. Unclear why, because none of the changes happened in the live sync, so I expect the resource exhaustion.
Okay. So if you look at the spec, there's a few open PRs, mainly around APIs. I don't know if there's any open questions to discuss on these at the moment. I know we touched on them some on the breakout this week. Okay. If not, then I assume everyone's busy with Pectra, which soon people will be focused on PeerDOS. And yeah, otherwise we'll focus on the open PRs and keep working towards DevNet 6. One thing that did come up was this BPO EIP, and it proposes a configuration so that we can say, for example, at this epoch, the blob parameter should look like this. And there was a question of exactly how this configuration looks. There was some conversation on Discord. There's a few different suggestions. We touched on this during the breakout this week, and I thought we had agreed to essentially have a list of objects or records in YAML, at least on the CL side, but did want to bring this up just so we can finalize the decision today. Did anyone have any issues with what we settled? Yeah, Gabe has a link here, or example here in the chat. So you would have the key, and then yeah, just this list of the relevant data. Anyone have any problems with this? I think one thing in particular is like YAML support per client, just in the event that there's issues parsing this for some reason. Everyone feel good about this?
There was also some discussion about potentially having this in a separate file. I'm not sure what was the decision about that. Or do we just want to include this in the config YAML?
I would just like to config or include it in the config YAML, not a separate file. I take that suggestion back.
Okay, so there was another discussion about how could the user override these in case of an emergency override needing to happen? Because overriding a list element seems like a weird way to do it.
Yeah, I would imagine. Well, yeah, I guess if you wanted to, you could just edit it yourself. But I would imagine then clients would just ship with new configs. So you would pull some new release. You could even just imagine providing the configuration and replacing just that.
I guess the question there is if we expect a BPO to be going badly and we want to emergency cancel it, would we do so with the new client release or would we do so with a flag? I guess if it's with a flag, then we're talking about an override approach. And if it's with a new release, then yeah, it's a new config and it doesn't really matter then.
Do client teams have a preference here?
I'm not. I want to question the premise. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know I've done this a bit in Discord. The emergency release thing is not going to happen. I'm going to state that more or less on the record. I think, not as a prescriptive thing, but as a descriptive thing. The coordinate, we couldn't get this coordinated for Haleshki in time. A bunch of people on a single Telegram group on a time scale of minutes. And if you put the time scales involved here, it's a lot of things that go wrong in the scale of minutes to hours. And then you go from there to what, weeks, days, weeks. And at that point, that's just not, that coordination can't happen. I'm sorry, please stop. I'm sorry, I'll rephrase. I think that allowing this fantasy, again, I will use that word very deliberately, of an emergency release to guide the design of this in ways that compromise the design in general is misguided.
Do you have an alternative that you'd prefer?
Well, what it means is that to the extent that including it in this say a pre-existing configuration, if the only issue there was that it doesn't allow for an emergency override, to me that's just like a non-issue. So it doesn't really create another alternative as much as it eliminates one of the putative reasons for preferring a separate file.
Yeah, I mean, the separate file bit is kind of a detail. It sounds like you're questioning the whole BPO idea itself.
Well, that too. I've started taking that a bit as a fait accompli at this point. I'll be honest, but yeah, I'm not particularly convinced about BPOs in this context either. That's true.
Maybe one more clarifying parameter. I'm not expecting BPO values to be chosen such that a past BPO has failed and we need to schedule a new one to reduce the blob count. But rather, let's say we go from 6 blobs to 9 blobs and we see a degradation of 5%. And this is a maximum number we had expected. And we have another BPO fork scheduled for about 2 months from now, that we have roughly some amount of time to cancel said future BPO. So this can be achieved with configs being shipped at different times, and you have plenty of time to react because any BPO section chosen, any value chosen needs to allow for enough time to react, as well as be fine-grained enough to allow for monitoring to judge how the next BPO fork would go. So that being said, would you still oppose that being declared as an emergency? Because yes, it is an emergency as in we need to delay the future fork, but no, it isn't an emergency that you need to make a release today. It's about canceling a future fork.
No, I would not categorize that an emergency. If it's in the timeline of when releases are feasible to coordinate, then it's not an emergency by at least a definition I would see.
Okay, so I would rephrase the earlier point as this is not an emergency, but having the ability to either override or ship a new config, it sounds like the preference would be to just ship a new config and we choose BPO values such that we can always cancel a future one with ample warning.
Given everything, that would be something I can live with.
Okay. So circling back to this configuration, are we good with this? It sounds like, yeah, this structure here in the standard config that we all have, in the event we need to change it, there would just be a new configuration that a user of a client would get in some way. Do we feel like we need to also have like a command line override? I mean, that to me would be more of this emergency situation, but it's like another code path to test, and yeah, it would be tricky to coordinate. Enrico?
Generally okay is the only thing that I want to point out is that adding that in the main configuration, there is a slightly impact on the beacon API spec endpoint that returns all the configuration, and we have this structured array. Then we need to make sure that we render in JSON this BPO schedule and we don't break any VC, because VC essentially is not interested in this information, and for some reason it may not expect a JSON object in the response as a nested schedule. So yeah, we need to make sure that we don't break anything.
Yep, that makes sense.
I mean, all YAML just translate to JSON anyway, so I don't see a problem here.
Yeah, I mean, on the VC side, can talk about only tech. I don't think there is any problem, but any tooling that consumes that endpoint, I don't know how it's designed and what are the assumptions there. So
Well, I mean, if we make a decision today about the structure, then it should give them plenty of time to deal with this later.
Yeah, and I mean, this is something that will appear in testing. I guess like one issue is if you know, some implementation treats these as like unexpected keys and causes an error or something, but I think we'll be okay. Cool. So we'll go with this format that Gabe put here in the chat. We will put that in the config YAML. Yeah, Mark, we are.
Okay.
And no CLI for now.
That is currently what is in the EIP, or at least like very closely approximating it. The tricky thing is just like the config file is technically a YAML file, but we have never had anything that was like a nested array or anything like that. But that is valid YAML. But client team should watch out for that. I do think it's worth doing it that way because this may not be the only time that the consensus side has to specify a sort of array-like object in a config, and the EL side already does it regularly. So if we do have problems with that, it's worth fixing.
Yeah, and again, I think it will. I mean, this sort of thing will come up immediately in testing, so we should know. Justin asked, should we backfill Deneb and Electra limits? We need to do Electra for sure. You mean like include those in the BPO schedule?
And the blob schedule. Yeah.
Why would we need to do that?
So we don't need Devnet, but we do need Electra, I believe. I mean, like if we just want to use a get blob, I get max blobs per block limit function, like it'll need the Electra blobs limit, which we're using in Fulu at the beginning.
Yeah.
And
the way I was thinking about this is it would just go live at Fusaka. So Electra would be in place and then it's live at Fusaka. And sure, maybe there's like
yeah,
the same data in this list, but
to be clear, I'm not suggesting that we change how like Electra works. I'll explain it later.
okay.
Regarding testing, it would maybe be a bit problematic then, because we could assume that we're starting with Deneb, or we can assume that we start from Electra. So then how would you specify that we are starting from Deneb or are we starting from Electra if we just say max blobs per block is whatever? So like if we backfill, then we might need to backfill all the way.
Because the current Curios devnets are on top of Deneb and not Electra.
No, they are on top of Electra.
Then
I'm
why
just saying that like what's going to be the first element, then it's going to be epoch 0 and the specific max blobs per block. Like we might have more BPO scheduled in the future, and we might have Fulu at epoch 0 eventually, and we're gonna have whatever the next star will be at epoch 0, and then we're gonna have a mismatch of max blobs per block scheduling scheme.
Why would there be a mismatch? That would sound like a configuration error. Like it should be fine just to have like, yeah, epoch 0 is like the Fulu set, and then you just go from there.
A slightly different question. Are we going to use the blob schedule for like future hard forks? It might be what Barnabas is asking. So like for I don't know if we decide to raise the blob limit in the future after BPO forks.
Yeah, like do we want to touch anything else ever, or is it only gonna be the max blobs per block at that specific epoch?
This should be fine for Fusaka, and it could change in the future. I don't really see a reason why at the moment, but it could. Okay. Cool. I think that's sorted. And that does kind of tie into the next point. So we have PureDOS DevNet 6, and we should be looking towards Fusaka DevNet 0. Especially as Pectra goes live, that will be the next DevNet to focus on. We talked about this some on the breakout this week, and it sounded like there's agreement for Fusaka DevNet 0, just on the CL side, to be PureDOS DevNet 6, and then also go ahead and include the BPO EIP. So that would, imply that's implemented and working, and we do have some like initial configuration and data for how we want Fusaka DevNet 0 to look like. I guess there's a few things here. I guess one then is like, do we want to move this EIP to SFI, or do we want to handle that later? It's EIP 7892. I don't have a link handy, but it's there. And yeah, this is maybe administrative at this point, but it sounds like we are going ahead and scheduling this BPO EIP for inclusion. Should we just go ahead and do that formally? Okay, Barnabas has a question. No reason to do Fusaka Devnet 0 if we don't have EOF. Yeah, the intent is to have some version of EOF ready for Fusaka Devnet 0. I don't know if we want to touch on that today, but I think we should aim for this to have Fusaka Devnet 0, again with PureDOS DevNet 6 and BPO. We had suggested on the breakout this week to aim for somewhere around May 20th for Fusaka DevNet 0. Does that timeline sound reasonable to everyone?
I think the EOF timeline is a bit more questionable at this point. And if we don't include the latest version of EOF in it, then I don't think we should do Fusaka DevNet 0, and we should just do PPO with DevNet 7. Because there's no reason to have an old version of EOF pushed on top of this branch.
Yeah, I hear that. I would think we try to get everything ready. I don't know if Dano or an EOF person is here today, but this is something I guess we can discuss next week, if not today. And I do think we should push for this. It'd be good to have even if not completely stable, but a DevNet 0 up as soon as possible. Yeah, and sure, if it looks like EOF isn't ready, then we'll probably do what you're suggesting, Barnabas. Yeah, Perry says as far as he knows, the timelines should align. And no one seems to have any issues with this May 20th approximate date, so I think we should have that in the back of our minds. Okay. And to be clear, it looks like there are enough comments in the chat to go ahead and SFI EIP 7892. So I can go ahead and make that change later today to the meta EIP. And that tees us up to the next agenda item, which is the CFI set for Fusaka. So to recap, we currently have PureDOS SFI'd, meaning it is shipping. We just moved the BPO EIP to SFI from CFI, meaning the BPO EIP is shipping. From there are a number of CFI EIPs to discuss. we had touched on this last ACDC, and yeah, essentially just given the timing of different EIPs when they are proposed, and essentially having the deadline for Fusaka CFI, we wanted to revisit this today. So we should go ahead and make a final CFI call for Fusaka today. And again, from last call and looking at the meta EIP, the only real EIP that stuck out today to discuss for CFI is this EIP 7917. This is the proposed look ahead EIP. There were a number of other ones that we essentially leaned towards DFI for Fusaka. Again, acknowledging that we essentially want to exclusively focus on PureDOS and EOF for this fork. So given that context, let's touch on 7917. Would we like to CFI it or otherwise move to DFI on this call? Oscar says DFI 7917 and DFI the others. Okay.
Sorry, Dimitri from here back. Yeah. So I just wanted to make a short note regarding 7688. Yes, as usually. So together with the Mixed Bytes team, we are currently working on a detailed research on the actual effects and the actual impact of implementing this EIP. The research is aimed at understanding who is currently using for 788, which is beacon root on execution layer, which is directly connected to 7688. And the preliminary outcome is that currently EigenLayer, Lido, and one more protocol, which I cannot remember by heart, is actively using this EIP, and there is like around 10 or more protocols who are currently working on implementing 4788 into their protocols. And again, I want to point out that without 77688, they all will have to do some sort of a maintenance should beacon state change, which it most likely would in Fusaka. So just want to point out again that by including 7688 into Fusaka, we will save a lot of time and effort on the up layer for the up layer developers. And again, the actual research, unfortunately, is not ready by today, but it will be published, I believe, this week.
Okay, thank you. Let's just circle back to that because I do want to make a decision on 7917. Is anyone in favor or against CFI? I would like to hear from clients. Radek?
Hi, so yeah, I already wrote on Discord some time ago that I am weakly against because of the, not because the EIP itself is technically, something's wrong with it, but because of the, what we agreed on of how we are going to, work from now on in terms of scheduling forks and including stuff. And I'm looking right now at Teams diagram where there was a fork n-1 and n+1. I can share it with you. It's in the all core Ethereum magicians. And if you look at that, if you look at the first diagram from this post, for fork n, we can propose EIPs between testnet and mainnet releases for the previous fork. So in that terms, it's perfectly fine, in my opinion, to include the EIP. But I think we also agreed that we shouldn't include EIPs that are change something in the consensus if we don't have testnets that have been running with many clients and they are working. And for this EIP, we had 0. And so that's why I am slightly against including this EIP.
Right. Yeah. So I hear you with the point that, yeah, like what we should be very careful to do is not include a bunch of EIPs into a fork without due diligence. We saw with Pectra that that was problematic. So I don't think anyone wants to do that. I think at the same time, the way that we now have the setup of PFI to CFI to SFI, it seems like CFI is this like conditional approval that it's worth looking at in more depth. And that's where then we do the due diligence. And then maybe just like round this out, like we wouldn't put this into say Fusaka Devnet until everything else has essentially been proved out to be stable, right? So we would still focus on pure DOS and EOF. Only when that's the case would we then circle around to the CFI set. And I'm not really making a general claim about this EIP in particular, but that's the high level process. So I think it's helpful context. And yeah, okay. I think taking the comments on the call and in the chat were like net neutral. There's like a number of weekly in favor, weekly against.
So the Lighthouse team were weakly in favor. I think it does introduce a feel to the beacon state where like we wouldn't have any beacon state changes otherwise. So that is like a reason not to do it, but weakly in favor, I would say.
Not to do it for other teams. I mean, we already have the infrastructure, but other teams may not necessarily have put in the boilerplate code to have changes to the beacon state. So, and if that's like a huge amount of undertaking that would delay the fork, then we can understand that.
How hard is it to implement this EIP? Because if it's really just done under 1 day, and it could be included in the next DevNet without any problem from every single CL team, then it wouldn't like delay the fork. But if it takes like weeks and weeks of effort, then it should be not included.
And I don't think I would push back against including it in the next DevNet until we have PureDAS and EOF, even if it's a 1 day thing. Like I think this is how we got screwed in Pectra. We should make sure we have a stable thing that works and then decide if we want to add more. So obviously how long it takes makes a difference, but I think once we have Fusaka Devnet 0, we can look at the CFI EIPs and decide, okay, which ones make sense to add to Fusaka Devnet 1. But yeah, let's not include it already.
I'm not saying to include it, I'm saying to keep it as CFI, just not DFI it.
Yeah, I'm interested in what like the CFI thing, like considering to be included, because like I completely agree that pure death is top priority. Like without that, like all rollups based or not based like won't scale. But like being considering as in like as long as it doesn't interfere or like with pure death scheduling, we can consider it for inclusion. I think that'll be a good position, and I'm happy if we can be there. And yes, it's going to be very like useful for reconfirmations with a relatively small change. So yeah, interested in people are opposed to even considering it.
Okay. I think given the input and the fact that this is only CFI and not SFI, it seems like it's okay to move ahead with CFI for this today. Is that okay with everyone?
Alex?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure. I can't raise my hand. I'm driving in the middle of nowhere. So I just want to mention, I'm not sure because this was cutting off, but including this and testing this would be quite a big change in that it is the only thing that changes the beacon state. When there was another EIP that was mentioned as if this was going to be something surely to happen in Fusaka, that we will change the beacon state. But so far, out of the EIPs that we're considering, nothing touches the beacon state. And I think the crucial question we should be asking ourselves now is, do we really want to change that structure just because of this EIP? Because of this feature, do we want to change the beacon state?
Tell them, POTUS.
I suppose the answer to that question would depend on where other clients are in how prepared they are to change the beacon state.
Right. And it sounds like it might be easier for some clients than others.
Well, even though we don't have such a process yet of SFIing something for the hard fork after the next hard fork, and given the comment by POTUS that and many others that with the current scope of SFIed EIPs, there will be no changes to beacon state. If we can agree, say, of SFIing this EIP for the Amsterdam, that might work. So if we 100% sure that there's no changes to beacon state in Fusaka, which means that there's no issue to address, at least in this hard fork, and we can SFI now it for the next hard fork, I think it will solve the issue that might pop up should some changes to the state appear in Fusaka.
Right. And I guess this kind of gets to, I think Ongar was trying to prompt either Justin or Lynn, like, how bad is it to hold off on the ZIP for the pre-comps use case? Because it seems like that was the main use case that the ZIP would support.
Yeah, I can give some context around the pre-confirmations. So like pre-confirmations, like without this CIP, what would happen is that we would, like what we are discussing right now is basically having a Oracle, close to or like trusted Oracle solution, which would like ensure that the lookup is available in the VM and which is like it will work and we can have pre-confirmations, but yeah, it's kind of a hacky solution, I would say, and also not ideal.
Right.
And once we have this EIP, like we'll have the lookahead completely available in the EVM in a stable way, which would remove all the need of hacks and will greatly simplify the protocol that we have.
Redick?
Yeah, so I actually think I changed my position to slightly in favor, but I would just like to state that similarly to the attestation EIP in the previous fork, which was supposed to be easy, but turned out to be huge, I don't expect this one to be as big. I hope it will actually be as simple as the people who have already implemented it are saying. But what I think we should agree on is that if we start working on it and start having devnets for it, and it turns out that it actually is more involved than we initially thought, and there's this and that and whatnot, etc., and we see that it's growing and growing, we should make a decision to roll back and not continue and try to push it and try to complete everything so that it's ready, and just say, okay, it turned out to be more complicated than we thought. Let's move back and schedule it for Amsterdam and not try to push it for Fusaka.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, and that seems generally the same page that everyone's on. Matthew?
I definitely want to just verbally second what Tim said, that we don't want to get ourselves into the same situation that we had with jamming things in. And even though this isn't a jam, we don't know the scope. Let's get what's on the current roadmap in, get the dev nets running, And then if there's still time, we can always add stuff in.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, at least that's how I'm thinking about the use of CFI here is it allows us to make this call later. Obviously, that means that there's like some initial due diligence, and if it becomes problematic in the way Radek and others are suggesting, then definitely it would not be SFI'd.
But I think the biggest thing is to not take away dev velocity from the current development and the current feature set, and just keep focused and keep scope small so that we're all going in the same direction and we can make sure that we're going to get the next fork both quickly and smoothly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's why I like this pattern of basically only having SFI things on DevNets. Only once we feel good about those and they're stable do we consider other things. Okay, so I think taken all together then, it sounds like there is at least weak support for CFI in the CIP 7917. So let's go ahead and do that.
I also just wanted to point out, like, one of the concerns of this EIP was just that it might, burden epoch processing a little bit more because you have to calculate all the next epoch proposers at epoch processing time. But I did some measurements with Lighthouse, and that doesn't appear to be a concern. Even like Lighthouse, even the naive implementation, I hadn't used caches that we have, and the fact that we have tree states makes the proposer calculation extra slow without those caches. But it was only making epoch processing about 2 to 3% slower. But I'll see with caches, and I think it may not be necessary in other clients that don't need tree states to use caches. So.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so yeah, maybe just to summarize, like weak support to CFI, so we'll go ahead and do that. Everyone is saying that essentially at the first sign of any complications, we just essentially DFI it for Fusaka. So we would not SFI, it would not move on to any DevNet, and we would move forward. Okay. Then we did have one other EIP to touch on. Dimitri wanted to discuss 7688. And yeah, I mean, I think it's essentially the same conversation we just had for this EIP. Just to be clear, this EIP is about the stable containers, and the main thing is it keeps these generalized indices and the proof part of SSE stable. Yeah, we had touched on this last ACDC, and again, I think given like scope considerations and the fact that we do want to focus on pure DOS pretty exclusively, yeah, essentially there wasn't that much support to CFI this. We're here, so would anyone like to CFI it, or do we think we should not?
I mean, again, rolling back to the previous comment, so if there's no changes to the state, there's no need for this EIP, which is great. If the previous one would be included, I would highly recommend including like both of them. So the 7.9 whatever and this one. If not, then it's fine to keep it for later.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so the obvious issue is we have this like kitchen sink situation where we're like, okay, we include this one, then we need this other one, and then it cascades, which I think everyone is very aligned that we don't want to add a bunch of EIPs to Fusaka. Yeah. So yeah, just kind of summarizing the chat here, like I think following the previous argumentation we just had, like it would make sense to CFI, but I think then it's kind of as I'm saying, it starts to feel worse if we have all these things that could potentially go in.
So just one suggestion from my side: if we CFI like the previous one 7917, then we also should CFI 7688. If we're not, then let's DFI both of them, and then we're good.
Okay, so does anyone disagree with this approach that we should CFI both or neither?
I disagree. I think we should just CFI the proposer look ahead and not 7688. I just think it's a simpler change, and I think it's valuable.
If the proposer look ahead one has benefits without the other one, then let's include just one. If it doesn't have any benefits without the other one, let's not include any of them.
Yeah, as far as I understood, it does have benefits on one side, but then creates problem on other sides. So it's not the same use case.
My understanding is that even if we include 7918, the proposer look ahead EIP, that we're not going to break proofs for the beacon state because we're not crossing a power of 2 boundary. And if that's the case, then there's not like a huge motivation to put 7688 in this fork, because no matter what, there needs to be at least one time that the app layer is going to need to update their proofs when we include stable containers, hopefully exactly one time. My hope is that we can include stable containers when we make a change to the beacon state that breaks proofs, so that they only ever have to do this one more time. But right now, my understanding is that even if we include 7917, that we're not going to break the proofs. And so this is going to be the exact same amount of work for the app layer, whether we include 7688 or not in this fork. Well, actually, they would have to update their proof sooner if we include it in this fork. But either way, it needs to be at least once more, and hopefully exactly once more.
Okay. Anyone want to speak strongly to coupling them?
So if we are sure that introducing that doesn't break anything on the proof side, it makes sense to separate them. But from technical perspective, as I already wrote, we are kind of okay to bundle them because we have already an implementation of 7688. But problem is, I don't know if other clients have everything already for 788 and 7688,
Yeah.
and maybe delays for other reasons. Fork.
Yeah, my understanding is there's provisional support across various SSD implementations, but this is something that is like very low layer and touches, well, it only touches SSD code, but that's used as like a foundational layer for many things. So, okay, yeah, Matt.
So I think from a broader ecosystem perspective, and I think this is something that really we should reflect on, is we want to get to faster forks. We want to get to more regular forks. And there's nothing that stops us from just getting the small feature set that's nearly ready out now. And then in 3 months, we do those two. If we can get to this fast iteration of forks and really get ourselves into that mindset, all of these EIPs are much easier to get included. And maybe as a trial, we just get this one out quickly and just keep it limited. And then that might set a precedence going forward.
Yeah, that's a very good comment. But again, what we should keep in mind is that if we move to a faster hard forks, and if we do not have stable containers, then each and every fast hard fork would require this shitty maintenance, which is a huge pain in the ass. So if we really want to move to fast hard forks, we also should think about like not introducing complications and hurdles for applications. So I fully agree that if in this hard fork, if in Fusaka there is no changes to beacon state, no changes to proofs, it's perfectly fine. Then we include stable containers into the next hard fork, and then we can move like at any pace we want, because at least this part will be solved. But if we will not solve this part and we will just transition to fast hard forks, and then, for example, each and every of them or some of them will change the way how proofs work, it would create like enormous pain for the applications. That's also important to keep in mind. So it's not just about being fast on the core side, but it's also thinking about applications and making it not creating additional complications for them with this increased speed of hard forks. But in general, I'm fully for the increased speed of hard forks. Radek?
Yeah, so if I understand Matt correctly, this proposal was, we're working on pure DAS, we're working on some other EIP, small EIPs. These other EIPs are ready, we can ship them in maybe 3 months. And I would like to push back a little on that from engineering perspective, because if we are working on pure DAS as the main EIP, we are slowly merging stuff into our core code, modifying sometimes very core functions and a lot of changes. And then even if we have these other EIPs ready, then how do we release our clients? We would have to roll back all the, for example, peer DAS code so that it doesn't interfere and it breaks nothing, or maintain forks for every EIP and then somehow merge them together. It would be a nightmare, in my opinion. So I don't think this is something realistic.
That's exactly what I'm saying, though, is like right now we're so focused on the big two, like really it's pure DAS and EOF on both sides. And anything that gets in the way of that will take away development velocity from us actually getting those features 100% across the line. And that's exactly what I'm talking about, Radek. Like if we stay laser focused and make sure that we're all aligned towards those goals, we can get it done quickly. It might only be a few months before we're ready for the F fork. And then it could possibly be a few months for the G fork after that. But I think limiting the scope so that we're all moving in alignment towards each one of these forks, I think is critical in order to be moving the ecosystem forward as a whole. It's also more predictable for all the consumers. And I also agree with stable containers, critical. But again, like we already have the development velocity of where we're going for now. And you just have to choose what's the priority.
Okay, I apologize. I misunderstood you. Sorry.
Okay. So then following the discussion, it sounds like 7917 won't impact the proofs. So then we lean towards not CFIing 7688 because there just will be no change. We can handle it in a future fork. So then we'd CFI 7917 and yeah, basically DFI everything else. Sounds good? Okay. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so then, yeah, the Fusaka EIP set should be sorted. And there was one more thing on the agenda. And yeah, I guess, is there anything else on Fusaka? This last point was around the builder APIs and the Mev workflow. It's something I did want to bring up. But yeah, I guess before that, any other Fusaka comments? Okay. So then, yeah, this last thing, this came up when we were working on the builder APIs for Fusaka. I think it was Francis who originally made the PR. Let me just double check. Yeah, so essentially we have the builder APIs and we are updating for Fusaka where the main change was, I think, the self proofs. But either way, that was not the issue. The issue was that Jimmy then was looking at this and raised the question, what happens as we're thinking about this API in terms of very high blob count, right? So today there's like a relatively small number of blobs. Even with Fusaka, we could get to like quite a large number. And the question then is essentially the scalability of this API. So how this has worked since the merge is that if I choose to use MapBoost, I, as a proposer, give my signature to the relay, and I get back the execution payload. With Deneb, we added the blobs, so then it makes sense to then also add the blobs to this API as well. And now the question is, as we increase the blob count, what happens? This is potentially an issue because it's a synchronous API. So you would, again, as a proposer, you would call the relay and get back the execution payload and all these blobs. And I think it was something that, like, say there's 72 blobs, which is potentially imbalanced for Fusaka. I think it was something like 10 megabytes of data in the response. The concern is, if I'm using MapBoost, I might also be like a relatively under-resourced node. And so now the question is, like, is this even valuable or the right way to think about this? And there's a number of things to do here, or that could be done. So one of them is a pretty radical change where we just actually we don't have this API at all, where there's no response. What this means is that the relay itself is entirely responsible for gossiping the block and blobs on their end. We could leave the status quo where, again, the relay just returns all the data to the proposer, who then also gossips the data on their end. There's a sort of middle ground where you return the payload to the proposer, and then we have some other way to distribute blobs. That could be sort of an asynchronous API with the relay between the proposer. Also, someone brought up the point to get blobs, and you could imagine that you might not even need to get the blobs from the relay. Point being, there's a concern about this API. There's a couple of things to do here, and I wanted to get feedback on these different ideas. Does anyone have any initial response or reaction, or also questions? Does anyone feel like we need to change the API? Because that was the original concern, that basically it would be too much data for a proposer to download in time.
It is too much data.
Okay. Terrence?
I mean, this is also like an issue today with regarding to timeout, right? Because relay will time out or will apply some delay before returning the data. And typically client side has this timeout threshold. So it's a little confusing sometimes when you see like an error from a relay saying that, or seeing some error on the validator client saying that we failed to propose a block because of relay didn't return the block on time. And it's a scary log. But if you look at Beacon Block Explorer, your block is actually proposed, it's actually released by the relay on time and stuff. And this happens today quite frequently, and it's not nice. We should fix it. And I think this is kind of, we can probably like kill like two birds with one stone here. Like this will also resolve that.
And to be clear, your suggestion is just to return nothing?
I don't know. I mean, I don't have a good answer. I need to study this problem more. I think you return something, but not like, but don't rely on proposer to like gossip the block, kind of. If that makes sense. Yeah, I need to think about this more.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean,
like Tony
that
said,
does make,
return
yeah,
a positive
that does
response.
make sense, yeah. Okay. So I'm at least hearing we think we should revisit this API for Fusaka, which might be enough for today. I've reached out to a number of different builders and relays to get their perspective as well. They're kind of in progress of reviewing this. Yeah. Anyone feel like we should leave it alone? Okay, just going off the chat here, it seems like people generally think we should do something. There's a question. Let's see. Would this impact the trust assumptions based by pure DOS if we have a handful of relays? Yeah, I mean, the relays would be responsible for getting the data out as well, right? Because otherwise builders wouldn't use them. So short answer is no. Okay, that was helpful. I'll probably, well, I will keep getting input from different relays and builders. And yeah, that will end up probably with some kind of diff to this PR, and we can move forward from there. Let's see. I believe that was everything on the agenda. So yeah, any closing comments? Otherwise, we'll wrap up for the day. Okay, then thank you, everyone. I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.